for joining me, everyone. We're going to have a little chat here today around about the building tomorrow's enterprise, thinking about technology and how we're using that to build tomorrow's enterprise, maybe about the relationships that the technology department, the CIO, has with the business doing that. So thanks for joining me to talk about that. I'm glad you're all here. Perhaps we could just open the conversation thinking about how important the CIO and the role of the leader in the technology department is in business nowadays, that we're so dependent on technology. Can I start at this end of the table? I mean, what do you think about?
Sure.
What do you think about that?
Fundamentally, I think it's one of the things that allows companies to change. So it's how well that role is embedded into the real needs of the company. So it's not seen as a separate function, building things which, being honest, your board doesn't entirely understand. You're buying some servers to do what? To do something which I don't really know why you need so many. Why do you need more than one server? Why do you need 500? Those conversations need to be put in the past. I think you have to explain things in terms of the value you see in what you're doing and how that translates into the bottom line for companies. Is it revenue generating? Can you make it revenue generating? And the more you change that relationship, and the more powerful that, I guess, that opinion becomes at the board level. So you want to have those conversations there to be able to see the opportunities that gives for various people around the table trying to solve different problems.
Sure.
So.
And are you finding your role is becoming increasingly involved in business decision making and influencing the way the business is going?
So I'm relatively new to the company I'm in, less than a year, but I am, yeah. I mean, I see my strategy as very much linked to the business strategy. They're fundamentally intertwined now, and if my strategy wasn't intertwined, I'd be doing it wrong, frankly. So I've got to find the right ways to see the problems that we're solving, and very much listen to what our customers are saying. So it's less about what other similar businesses are doing. It's more about what the customers want, and try and find ways to link that through the right mechanisms.
Sure. Tom, what do you think about the role of the CIO or the technology leader in an organisation, and how it's perhaps becoming more powerful or influencing business decisions? What's your take on that for the organisation you're in?
Yeah, so, coming from a retail organization, retail background as a technologist, the role of a technology leader these days is really helping map, fundamentally, the business ambition, right, to a set of technology capabilities. Yeah, and the role of a technology leader these days is also about innovation, right? Not necessarily the structure of an organization, but the capabilities of an organization, right? What is best to bring forth the capabilities, right, to the betterment of the colleague, the customer, right? So if you talk about how you do that, it may take place in structure, it may take place in capability, it may take place in culture. So as a technology leader sitting sort of maybe at the ExCo or the management board, you do have that responsibility, right? But I think that kind of responsibility does permeate throughout the entire leadership of technology.
Sure.
Yeah.
And would you say in your organisation that role has become, to quote, more powerful in the organisation, i.e. you're listened to more than CIOs or people in your position used to be? Is the influence greater?
I think the influence is greater because the capabilities that the business depend on now are recognized as very technological.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So with that recognition from the business, right, technology does have more input, more say, right, in how things are done.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. And you're involved in a lot of risk. Thinking about risk. Do you seeing any trends where the CIO and their immediate organisation are having more influence in the business because they're either contributing to or dealing with more risk? How does that play out from your point of view?
From my perspective, yes, absolutely. I mean, the business I'm in is all about identifying threats and risks for clients. And that is what we partly have to do in IT, is identify, okay, where is that next potential disruptor? Where is, partly our business perhaps going to be eroded by technology?
Yep.
And also looking across the organization and identifying where we're going to struggle to implement something like automation properly. So my role isn't just about the tech. In fact, I've moved well on from that perspective.
Okay.
It's actually more about how do we work together with the business to apply the right technology? How do we change the organizational culture to accept what we're trying to achieve here?
Okay, very good. Can we come down this end? Let's have a think about your organisation. You're dealing a lot with data and very technology-oriented organisation built on technology, right? So is it natural that your role and the role of the CIO and the immediate leadership team in IT is very powerful within your business, would you say?
It's a very interesting equation we have. We have a lot of CTOs. We have numerous chief data officers in a company like Experian. So the knowledge of technology around the board table is significant. You know, we are a tech company effectively. Data is one of our services. That being said, the role of the CIO has a very important role to play. So whilst we've got lots of innovators and product developers and data architects, actually the run and the operations and actually the customer experience and the customer journey that we're setting sits within the role of the CIO. So there's still a lot of influencing to do with the business leaders and the sales leaders to be able to set the tone and to be able to provide the capability on the outcomes that we're trying to drive.
Well, that's fascinating, isn't it? Even an organisation that's technology at its heart, and you just said you're a technology company, even then you're still having to do some leveraging with the sales and
huge
functions.
Amount of leveraging.
Really?
I don't think it goes away. Yes, absolutely.
Really?
Yeah, I think
fascinating.
Sales guys are
Fascinating.
sales guys. And I don't
I thought they'd see you as God, you know, and like, all hail the technology team.
if only it was that simple. But,
okay. And Oliver, you must talk to loads of clients about influencing to change technology. You must work with lots of CIOs. What's your viewpoint on how important leaders within the technology function, regardless of their title, are nowadays?
Yeah, I think it's super important. I mean, my background is as a full-on techie who's then gone through sort of IT leadership, IT architecture roles, and as you say, now advise CIOs and CTOs and other chief architects. And I think the thing for me is having a leader that other technologists can look up to and sort of see where their career might go is super important on the one hand, because I think we have lots of good technologists in the industry, but not perhaps so many fantastic technical leaders of tomorrow. Clearly we have the current generation, but that's key. But also, I echo what others have said already around being that bridge, that translator between the business aspiration and technology capability. Absolutely, with an architecture, from an architecture standpoint, that's absolutely crucial. Is to get the business and technology teams thinking in a common language, which that capability concept is great for doing.
I mean, all that given around how important the CIO role is, it sounds like you're all saying that actually they need different skills nowadays. We were talking about organisational change skills and translation to the business skills. Talk to a lot of people about still struggling with modernising their existing technology landscape to be able to transform for the future, building tomorrow's enterprise. Can we talk for a second about sort of consuming new digital technologies that help take you forwards and perhaps some of the baggage that organisations might be carrying? Are you guys, is that still true? Are organisations still struggling with legacy technologies and infrastructures, and how is that either limiting or are you over that now? Perhaps we could start.
Yeah, sure. I think every company's got a degree of technical debt. I think it's just the nature of the beast, unfortunately. I've been able to overcome it in the last two organisations I've worked with by just telling stories and being able to give the board a different view of different assets that you may purchase where actually you would have to run and maintain it. I came from a logistics business with airplanes. I said we wouldn't spend £150 million on an airplane without actually maintaining it, because something bad would happen. It would fall out of the sky, it would stop working. Well, a server is no different, a business software is no different. And they could really understand the concept of actually what we need to do with the plane. So it helped them understand the concept of what we need to do with our IT estate. So I've always looked at where can I actually draw something from a real part of their everyday life and actually translate it to something within the technology space that they really don't understand and they shouldn't need to understand. That's our job. But it's helping them understand the challenges and so far, touch wood, that technique has worked. And as we're moving to the cloud now, that becomes, even more challenging for the legacy estate, because it's now been done to us and we're paying a price. So actually showing the commercial model difference between a cloud model where it's always on, it's an OPEX model, rather than a traditional capital investment model, run it dry, take the depreciation holiday, sweat the asset. You can't do that in a cloud environment.
Yes,
And so those, being able to educate them in advance of getting to a period of pain is something I think we all need to take on board.
It's almost like it keeps you honest, isn't it?
It does keep you honest.
But I think it is. So one of the things that you need to change the conversation around is actually with finance. So how you communicate what you're investing in and how that's done. So we've moved to an objective-based budgeting in the last year, which is basically not budgeting by projects. So if you imagine the fallacy of budgeting by projects means you will come up, you spend hours and hours trying to define a next year in the middle of November, I'm going to spend 159,333 pence on this particular project, and I know exactly that that's right. And then you go off and promise to everyone that that's what you're going to spend, and then you don't spend it, you spend more or you spend less, and then everyone starts getting frustrated with the whole process. And you end up, delays cause havoc in the budget because everything starts to shift around in an uncontrollable way. So moving, some organizations have done this, but I found this is it's probably one of the hardest things to do, actually, to get people to buy into that investment in areas, that investment in, we don't really sell products as such, we sell services, and professional services companies have a slightly different view. But I actually think services are a better way to look at than products, because products tend to have you tend to think of this as a product or that's a product or something that's physical, whereas if you're investing in something, it's not about building it once and then leaving it alone. As you said, you need to think about what's the ongoing model that allows that product to thrive. And when you look at many services, everything from buying subscriptions to buying cars is changing into leasing type models. Mm-hmm. So that changes your business as well. So you have to think differently about how you're funding and financing your investments, because that conversation actually does create very interesting conversations at the high level of companies. They start to see why they're doing things in a certain way, and everything gets easier once you get to that point, and you spend a lot less time pointlessly thinking up numbers to do projects which you may or may not do. I think that's a fundamental enabler that allows you to then shape, I guess, how you think about your role in the company.
So needing actually the skills to be able to talk to the finance CFO or lead to be able to convince them of the merits of what you're doing in ROI type terms, results. You talk about objective type budgeting.
You need to be able to some extent, you need to be able to speak the language of the finance director. He needs to understand how what he gets for his money, how you're returning on that investment, what's the NPV of these things.
So we're already saying that CIOs or technology leaders are translators to business, people dealing with change. Now they're financial gurus, or at least being able to talk the language.
Don't call me a financial guru, please God.
They're chameleons, that's
chameleons,
sure.
Absolutely. Tom, from your perspective, how are you seeing that play out in your organisation? What do you think that CIOs have to do around convincing the business that they've got a good value to bring and that they can contribute to that, and what are the skills needed to be able to do that?
I think from a retail perspective, obviously, the proof is a little bit easier, right? Because the colleague experience is improved. You can see it. You can feel it, okay? The customer experience is improved. You can see it. You can feel it. But when you talk about, convincing the business, the value, right, of what you're doing, right? I love the plane analogy. In fact, I'm going to steal it, right? But, when you talk about customer experiences, you can easily dream that up, right? Or you can easily help convey that story of why, right, that change should be done, why it should be enabled, because everything that we do in retail these days is all about that personalized experience, right? So anything that can help you, right, be closer, right, to the customer without being creepy, and it's a fine line, right? Anything that helps you be closer, okay, is actually something that you can test and learn into, right? We're not, just like we were mentioning, projects are dead, right? We're really talking about outcomes, and I would take a step back and say, we need to start organizations down that path if they're not already down it, right? The concept of agile. Agile is really a dirty word, but let's be very specific. Iterative delivery, right? Iterative delivery is really key, okay, to today's sort of technology organization. Whether or not you're agile, however you want to define it, iterative delivery is definitely needed, right, when you're talking about big, massive programs of change, right? And already ripping off the airplane analogy, you don't build an airplane in one iteration and say it'll fly, right? You build it, you have multiple stage gates, you have multiple tests, right? So when you talk about the modern, like convincing the business, you're building into it, right? The business is with you, right? So you're on that journey together.
And are you seeing that there is still challenges for you with legacy technology and infrastructure that you're having to deal with? Is that still a thing, or are we past all of that now?
I think raise your hand if you have a mainframe, right? I think everybody's got a mainframe, right? Absolutely, everybody has legacy technology. The question is whether or not you're able to sustain your innovation on the legacy technology, whether or not you're able to operate on your legacy technology, right? We can talk about cloud, we can talk about hybrid, we can talk about all these sorts of new pieces of infrastructure, but we can't sell that. We're going to have a hard time selling that to the business if it doesn't, if you can sustain your pace of innovation, if you can sustain your operations on what you have.
Yeah.
Building on that point, if you don't mind jumping in, is visibility of that. So many organizations don't actually know what they have because, let's face it, the CIO role maybe is a 2, 3, 4, 5 year role these days. You've got changes of staff, that technical debt we've talked about already. The knowledge, the institutional knowledge of the systems is just not there. And what's worse is often folks don't even know how many systems they have underpinning various different platforms, or how many. If I was to ask all you around the table, exactly how many devices do you have on your network? Probably wouldn't be able to answer exactly, right? And so I'm seeing a trend towards.
I would.
Right. Well, maybe you're a customer.
Exception of one.
But how up to date is that data? So it's that challenge of, in this kind of evolving world that's based on perhaps a bedrock of some legacy systems plus hybrid and other things. How do you actually keep in near real time on top of everything that's going on in order to, be confident in the operations for one thing, but then better build on that to create those new experiences for customers.
You have to think about how that sounds though to other members of the board. So if you go into a board meeting and someone asks you, how many servers do we have? No idea. There's lots of them though. There's lots of them. Lots of data centers. There's lots of stuff. Lots of wires coming out of them as well.
Don't sound very credible.
Some of them have got names. Some of them haven't. It isn't. If you think about the diligence of how that sounds to the rest of the board, that doesn't put you in a good position. I think you have to. I mean, I guess we should talk about data at some point, but it's not just customer data, but that data is the way to both sound confident at the board and also have, that you could never lose an argument when you're backed up by data. So you can have a discussion about things, but you can't prove that something that's true is not true. So you use that as a basis to then it helps you define what things you need to do and invest in. So if you do have data centers which you're not quite clear on what's in there, and there's been 15 years of legacy, everyone understands that, but they also need to understand that probably all of their fingerprints are on that problem. It's not just because the CIO didn't look after it. It wasn't driven to think about, well, why would we not keep on top of that? Why would we not want to know? How did we let this happen?
It's a really important point, because they should be ashamed of themselves not asking the question.
Yeah.
How do we keep current regulated compliance with all the different legislations around there? And so what do you need to do? And I think it's flip it around. I don't talk about boxes and wires. I talk about the outcomes. And one of the principles we agree is we're going to run on supported systems, whether that's a mainframe, whatever box in the cloud. It doesn't matter. It's the most optimal cost and a service at the right SLA. That's the outcome I'm trying to drive. How you deliver it, it's irrelevant.
Agreed. I mean, I've had those conversations as well. When I joined Control Risk, we had major issues with infrastructure and availability of just basic services. So the conversation for me was actually quite easy because I said, right, we're going to get off this tin. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, I started having conversations about, look, the IT team need to focus on the outcome, what the business value is, delivering products, rather than tinkering with tin. That's really, not going to provide a lot of value. So for me, it was actually quite easy. We moved into the cloud and we're just about done. So yeah, we've seen, the transformation that the IT function went through, but also the outcome of the business. We don't worry about all those basic issues. I don't have to go to the CFO and say we need more investment for servers because they hate having that conversation.
Yeah.
So if you need to do that, we were just talking about, not going to the board with a I don't know gov, and also not having conversations about tin and wire, but outcomes. But surely modernization of infrastructure and your assets is a necessity to build upon. So are you then translating that necessity into effectively a project and then into an outcome? Is that your jobs to build that story out and then say, oh, and by the way, that's means we need X new servers or whatever it is that you need? How do you get over the fact that there is legacy that does need transforming at the end of the day, and some of that's not sexy stuff? How do you Natascha, let's go start with you.
I think it's really important that you're just honest, right? The board and Exco, the reason why I'm on Exco and why I get on with them so well is because I am very honest. And I've had lots of conversations where I've said, all right, there's stuff in the data center. If we don't get rid of it, we're going to be in trouble. It's old, unsupported, etc. And, I don't think they've really understood the full breadth of the risks around that. But they've trusted me because I've been transparent about this is what it's going to give you, this is what risk we're going to take away from you, and this is the outcome.
Okay, so we're saying, actually, we're building up confidence in the board and our stakeholders such that when we do need to call on that, we can pull the card that says, something risky here, we need to do something about it, please give me the support and investment. Conor, what do you think?
I think you're absolutely right, and I think I go back a stage and actually you set the tone when the initial investment case is put forward, because you've got to look at the full life cycle. What's the cost to run and maintain this? Not the cost just to build it, because if you just focus it on build, it will very quickly become technical debt. Yeah. So that whole life cycle, so you're signing up to 5, 10, 15 years of the service, not just a 6 month, 1 week build, whatever methodology you choose, and that changes their outlook then, and because it really impacts the overall business model. It's not the IT model, it's the business model. Are we pricing the products and services right in the marketplace, looking at that's the cost to run and maintain this technical service for a period of time? So you really start bringing the sort of value chain and the IT architecture together, looking at the products and services and all of the components of the products and services.
Because we used to, I remember maybe about 10, 15 years ago, we used to be heavily reliant on the architect who would deliver henceforth the strategy of the change that needed to be delivered, and that got translated into projects.
Much simpler world back then, right?
I don't know about that.
Well, different problems.
I had lots of conversations with architects.
I think in terms of the scope of the IT function.
Absolutely.
That's what I mean in terms of the scope, in terms of, 15 years ago, internet and email was in its infancy. People were, still kind of questioning whether, some of this stuff would be mainstream. It's actually in some industries, right? Whereas today, everything has, almost everything has moved to digital, and so that's why I say the complexity. I think the days of having one, as an architect by background, most of my career has been in IT architecture. The days of having one architect in an organisation are long gone, right? You've got lots of specialist architects doing different parts of the architecture.
Yeah. So, I mean, Tom, can I come to you? Is the architecture function then perhaps no longer all powerful in terms of designing the future of the technology function? Is that role, the architect, as it used to be, gone, as Oliver was just saying? And in fact, now we're talking about specialists that contribute to your business outcome vision. What's your view?
Yeah, so I agree with Oliver completely. Because of the technology, right, becoming more complex, there are more technologies out there. architecture, right, in terms of that traditional sense of a box and capability in the box, right, that's pretty much dead. But there is still a place for architecture for sure, right? But I would abstract it even a little bit more and talk about capabilities, right? Technical capabilities, not in this sense, not business capabilities and business outcomes. When we talk about building that transformation, right, within technology, right, we also need to look at what technical capabilities, right, we have and what technical capabilities we want to bring to the future, or bring to the table, right? As an example, when you talk about migrating from your traditional data center to the cloud, okay, there has to be a realization of the architecture, the fundamental platform between a data center and the cloud is completely different, right? In a data center, you need you need a bigger box. You buy a box with bigger CPUs, right? In the cloud, you don't do that, right? What you do is you buy more boxes, so you scale not vertically, but you scale horizontally. So that architecture, that capability, right, in that migration that you're trying to bring forth, right, that changes. Yeah. So I would really advocate when you talk about sort of that technical change, right? You talk about the technical capabilities that you have and what you need to have moving forward. Yeah.
John, what do you think?
I think it's important that you think about where the architecting gets done. So do you have a traditional model of there's an architect who then lays down the law for a bunch of people to come in and build something? That was possibly never the right model anyway. So how that role gets embedded into the team, but it is, I have architects, and you can see the people who have a commanding knowledge of an area are people that everyone wants to talk to. They literally have a ticket machine at their desk. I was talking to one of my guys today. He said it's like being at the doctor's surgery. Just take a ticket. I'll be with you in a minute. And I think because people want their knowledge. They want to understand how they can approach a particular problem, and they want that guidance. So I look at things like what are the principles you're trying to get to. So what do you care about the most in the way you build things? And what you said about the cloud is, it is interesting because as an ex-developer, it's quite hard to finally accept that actually it's not about slaving for hours over making the code most beautifully efficient. It's just, will it scale, and will it scale in a simple and clean way? So
secure way.
Yeah, and I mean, for us, security is everything. So you see
developers have got lazy.
Yeah, I think it is probably for most companies, but it's also there's a competitive advantage in security if you do it better than anyone else. But I think if you look at services which have been built, so sometimes it's not about old hardware or old software. It's actually just the complexity of what's been built makes it difficult to manage, difficult to scale. It doesn't meet the requirements. You can't make it go faster because it's so interwoven with systems that don't perform well. And that itself is becoming one of the new art forms. How do you build really simple things that can be put together in really simple ways and be very efficient at running quite complex outcomes, quite complex tasks? And that is it's one of the things to really pursue, is to see how do you do that? What are the things that really matter in those conversations? Because it is quite tempting for companies to just pile on more and more products and more and more technologies, which seem good at a surface level, but if you look at them over a 5-year period, it's going to cost you a lot of money, and it's very complex to run and understand exactly what you've built.
That really resonates with me. I mean, the point solution problem, we see it a lot, particularly. So Tanium often gets put in the cybersecurity space, and there's a massive amount of point solutions that solve a tiny little bit of the cybersecurity problem. And actually, I think what you're talking about, and what we also talked about earlier about capabilities, for me, one of the enabling building blocks is also to focus on platforms as part of the architecture. So rather than lots of little point solutions fixing tiny little pieces, where do you look for strategic platforms? So getting that balance of best of breed versus platforms right is obviously a constant kind of argument of where do you draw the line. But for me, having those enabling platforms you can then build on is really important, and that's absolutely where we play, is in being an enabling platform in customers' architectures.
And you just mentioned on-point solutions there. It's a really good segue. So do we still see organisations that are built on point solutions with on-point pieces of software? And how does that estate, rather than the legacy infrastructure estate, how does that historic on-point software solution organisation transform to tomorrow's business, particularly, and I think, John, you said we've got to talk about data at some point, especially being able to gather that data together in a coherent fashion to be able to use. Let's start with you, John, because you mentioned the data thing. I mean, what do you think about sort of on-point legacy software type solutions and how we need to move upwards and onwards to be able to transform tomorrow's enterprise?
Yeah, I mean, it's how you understand the data points that matter, I suppose, if you're looking internally or externally, or how your customers behave, what things are they telling you? And most organizations probably don't listen enough to all of those noises that are coming in. So how do you filter those noises to get a true and consistent message when so I'll give an example from my previous job. So it was very clear that optimizing web pages helped, but it was only by measuring essentially how much money we made by the page being 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds faster. And that, when you could actually prove that metric, then that became a really powerful conversation, because then you had a reason not to make the page slower. And that single data point drives all further conversations in that strand. They become, well, why would we do that? Because it'll make the page slower. So it might help team A, B, or C achieve some sort of goal, but it's going to cost us money unless they can prove that it will make us money. And then that becomes a much more balanced conversation. And I think that is, from very fast-moving consumer businesses, those sort of conversations are quite powerful to make sure that you have that information available. And all of those things lead through to your conversations about your approach and your technology and what your real objectives are. So, do you all agree on the objectives? I mean, going back to, I guess, some of the points you were making earlier, just you are in technology, you're sort of a middleman facilitating many of these conversations. Yep. You do. I often dream of the day I go into the meeting and everyone's actually had a conversation before I got there. They already know what they're going to do. You don't go in saying, "Have you spoken to this person?" And you go, "Well, no, they haven't." You go, "They've already spoken to them, and they've already said, no, we've sorted this out. It's going to be like this." You go, that would be an amazing meeting, which has never happened.
It's your nirvana.
That would be. It'd be good. It'd be good to go home. I think it probably means I'm redundant at that point. But it's how you share and manage that information, and how do you filter it to make sense. So what are you don't need a zillion data points. You just need one really important thing can change a company.
I think CIOs are still having lots of conversations with the business about why they should go with the enterprise application rather than that wonderful shiny new app that's out there that will only fix a very small part of the problem. That's a very frustrating conversation to have, but it's happening probably more and more now because the younger generation, that is their answer to the problem is picking an app. So I'm having those conversations, and actually I've had to let go a little bit, because what I've found is what I'm more concerned about and what's more important is the outcome of that app, the data. If I can get to the data and I know it's secure, then really the front end doesn't matter as much.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say that I'm not going to cite the specifics of the example, but just like it was talked about before, using data to demonstrate why you want to go for an enterprise solution versus a point solution, you can actually demonstrate that in cost, right? The cost of switching, the cost of the implementation, the cost of transition, right? So I have in the last year and a half, right, we were considering point solutions. But if you take into consideration the data, the amount of data, the strategic nature of the data, right, and shipping that off to a third party, right, versus going with a more established vendor, okay, that you may host yourself in the cloud or you're in data center, right, that strategic nature of that data has to be taken into consideration, right? The costs of porting your data from one cloud to another, right? You have to take that into consideration. So when you start bringing that type of more holistic thinking, right, into, you know, the true cost, the schedule, right, of that, the business will realize pretty quickly that in a lot of cases it's more suitable, right, to go with a more enterprise-like type solution than the point solution. So that's been my experience.
Very good. And let's talk to Conor. I mean, you're an organisation that lives and breathes off data, really, aren't you?
Indeed.
So I imagine your organisation has no legacy applications or relies on no on-point solutions, and you're pretty slick. Is that true, or is that a?
I actually think some on-point solutions are pretty cool. It's part of your USP. You know, what you need to try and do is keep them current. How do you keep them current? So we've still got mainframe. I'm buying new mainframe as we speak. It's bulletproof. It scales.
Does the trick, yeah.
And if you get to a certain size, and that's why I think we're all coming at it from a different perspective, because we've got different organisations, different size, different scale.
Yeah.
For us, our bureaus, you know, where we've got, you know, thousands of millions of people and data records in them, where probably you're up to, we're now on storage of brontobytes, and I had to Google that when I went to Experian. You know,
what is a brontobyte?
Good question. It's 1 and 28 zeros. So
that's a lot of zeros.
It's a lot of zeros. It's a lot of data. So to be able to scale at that level, you've got to take a slightly different approach. I love architects, because without architects, we'd be dead in the water, because these guys are engineers. They're not just painting pretty pictures on the screen.
Yeah.
And I think to be able to look, it's horses for courses. So we've got about 5 different modes internally in terms of our applications, from mainframe on the far right to a little mobile app on the far left, and we've got everything in the middle. Because each different type of product suite, I'd say, has a different application. And as we've bought a lot of fintech companies over the years, and they start on the far left. But as that business scales and matures, we've got to slowly move them to the industrialized area to the right, where security is really important. Speed of response is really important. And we have to get back to banks in, you know, less than 100 milliseconds in terms of response time.
That's fast.
You're not going to get that from the cloud always. So you've got to try and look at different ways.
Yeah, no, that's a really good, fair point. A lot of business sort of thinking cloud first, but not always applicable.
Not always applicable.
And certainly you give us a good example there. What about linking those applications and taking advantage of that data? I mean, just stay with you for a second, Conor.
Sure.
Have you, and I assume you have, really successfully linked all of the applications that you do have, even where you do have on-point applications?
Yeah.
What challenges did you have to overcome, or did your organisation have to overcome to get to that point? Or what are our challenges do you still continue to have?
We had our fair degree of spaghetti point-to-point solutions of information flowing backwards and forwards. So again, a two-pronged strategy. So APIs are huge for us. So re-engineering our application estate, microservices with the API engine, and we're processing about 400 million API calls a month at the moment. I mean, it's huge scale. And then we want the traditional EDI, XML transactions, but still need to be managed and monitored on a real-time basis. But they are different technologies for different reasons at different price points. So I think the commercial aspect has to come into that debate. So I think we mentioned earlier, data is a consideration, cost is a consideration, security is a consideration. You know, there's lots of I've got about 18 data points when I'm evaluating an application and the applicability of it.
Yeah.
And the variables change based on our risk appetite and our price point. We're trying to sell something in the marketplace.
Very
so
good.
It's quite a complex equation that we're trying to solve.
Yeah.
And I don't think we're consistent as IT communities at agreeing a standard model for that.
Yeah.
It's down to us to try and come up with what's worked for us previously.
Yeah, very good. And Oliver, you must see lots of this with the clients that you work with.
Yeah.
Do you think, do you see lots of clients with lots of challenges to overcome? Some of the challenges we've already talked about, you know, the legacy suite, but in particular, those sort of that application integration and integration of data. Is that something you see lots?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually in previous roles, I've been an API architect and middleware architect, enterprise architect for integration. So in a couple of places actually. So this is something I've lived and breathed. And I think it's still a challenge. And I think the trouble is there's been lots of attempts. You know, you mentioned EDI, and then there was. SOAP came along, and then there was REST, and so now it's kind of even more dynamic. You know, with webs and web applications and mobile apps. You know, things are really kind of evolving in this space. And I think the challenge a lot of organisations face is just what is the data model? Going back to data, what is the data model of the organisation? How does all this stuff hang together? what do we have, and how does this data flow? I think it's some of that basic stuff is a challenge. And what I've seen is folks getting very excited about a particular technology, be it APIs or be it SOA or whatever it is, but forgetting actually before they even go there, they need to understand what the business flow, what's the business process flow, what's the core data that's critical for the organisation, and what data do you care less about, and then focusing your application integration efforts on what's actually really, really useful to the organisation. I was at an energy company for a couple of years, and we had to deal with data flows around nominating power stations to turn on and turn off, and some of that was really, really time critical. But there was other data flows, perhaps employee records, far less priority. Yes, we need to update the HR system, but once a day is enough.
Yeah.
We need to update the power grid. We need to update that in milliseconds. So it's kind of understanding what's critical for the business in terms of data and application flows, and what's less priority.
I think you touched on a really good point there that we often forget, which is the business architecture and the business flow.
Yep.
Is so important. And the last 2 assignments I've been in financial services, I feel as if I've gone back 10, 15 years. When I came from the logistics industry, low margin business, boy, they got business process.
Yes.
And it was documented, everyone loved it, and continual improvement was really embraced. Come to financial services, and I don't think they can spell business process.
Okay, good.
John. At the start,
we don't have any of those on table.
Just looking at
We're fine. There's nobody on here.
So I think if you want to take control of the conversation around how is the business changing, or what's reshaping within, not just within your function but across the entire enterprise, then I think data is one of your key weapons. That's how you start to look at opportunities to make changes, which are also information which can be provided to other areas of the business for them to see what they can do. Yeah. But you are a key conduit in understanding what data you need and how that's presented and how well it's presented and how real time is it, how important is it to be real time. Sometimes it's not important, sometimes it is. Those conversations are what people look to the technology function. Now, there might be other areas of the business that they know what question to ask, which is just as important. But it's you need to be able to get a hold of that and understand how you would deliver the answer to that critical question.
Sure. I think the first question to ask, though, is where is your data and what do you have? Because I think a lot of enterprises don't actually have a good grasp of that. They know that there's value in their data and they keep saying that, but actually, where is it? What does it mean? And how many threats and risks are sitting in that data? Because actually, the amount of personal information and potential other issues that are sitting inside an enterprise is quite scary.
Yeah.
So I think that needs to be tackled first, because that's where you're going to have your biggest impact if something goes wrong.
Sure. That's great. I mean, we've had some lovely conversation here, and really surprising actually to talk about a CIO or technology leader that is now less the techie and more. We've talked about being able to talk about outcomes, being a finance linguist, translating, change management, and John, you talked about sort of facilitating the solutions and bringing people together. So that's really good. And Conor, you helped us to think about the decision points on data and security and cost modelling. I think maybe if we just finish off now about what do you guys see as maybe the biggest risk and the biggest opportunity for organisations, thinking about transforming to this enterprise of tomorrow from your perspective, whatever transforming for tomorrow means to you. What's going to get in the way and what's going to be your opportunity? Let's start at this end of the table with John.
Oh, I knew you were going to start
Sorry.
with me.
I'm happy to go.
He looks all right. He looks okay.
I think, internally, obviously, the inertia. So to change some things, everyone can see it and it's easy, but often the things you have to change are not things everyone wants to change. Mm-hmm. And that can be at a company or a business level. Those things can be difficult to change, and those things then either underpin or undermine what it is you're trying to achieve. So that inertia, I wouldn't say it's the only risk, but it's one of the ones that you have to think about a lot and try and figure out how will you communicate, I guess, the right incentives to make those changes. And I think that that's something that I think about a lot. So how do you embed those changes within within the firm you're working with.
Very good. And Tom, sort of big risks or big opportunities facing your organisation for change?
I think the pace of change, right, will always, technology, the technology department will always be adaptable to whatever the business rate of change is. My concern around that is, I think wherever we go, how fast we go, okay, we're moving into a world of more complexity, okay? It's not us that are the technologists in that sense doing that thing on the ground, but we still own that technology implementation. My biggest concern is the capability of the people, right? As we move into a world where everything is automated, everything is artificial intelligence, everything is machine driven, okay? The technological complexity of the systems, the platforms, the point solutions, whatever, the integrations themselves, okay, become more complex. And our people, our organizations, geared, capable, right, to face into that. Okay. That's my biggest concern.
Very good.
Yeah. That's
Natascha,
a really good point.
Quite clear. You ready with your answer?
Yes, but I actually resonate with what you were saying. I think the world is moving so fast. Technology is moving so fast. I think the worry is, can the business and the people working in that company cope with that amount of change? Mm-hmm. I see people struggling as it is. And so how are they going to cope with tomorrow? And I'm not sure businesses are yet geared up to be able to deal with that and to figure out how to help them along that journey.
Very good. Let's come to you at the end, Oliver. I want to rely on your summing up. Conor, tell us.
My risk is people. Change fatigue, but talent as well. We're doing things on scale, and I'm fishing a pretty small pond trying to find the talent. I think the opportunity, though, is huge. We're about to see the biggest technical transformation in the next couple of years, with the introduction of 5G. The speed of us being able to communicate machine to machine. We're going to sub 1 millisecond connectivity time with 5G coming in. So that's going to bring so much data. We've got 26 billion connected devices today. In 5 years' time, that's going to triple. The extra data we're going to all have to start processing is going to spin so many new technologies, which is exciting but concerning at the same time.
We better get all that data and legacy stuff sorted out then, in anticipation.
Indeed, it's all coming our way. So yeah, lots of process.
And Oliver, help us wrap up.
Yeah, it's a nice building,
summing
actually.
Up, what do you think?
I agree with everything that's been said. The complexity, the explosion in devices. I mean, for me, I like one of the things that our CEO says, which is a lot of organisations are really worried about the nation-state hackers. Breaking in, effectively like the ninjas going in through the skylights, in the ceiling of the building. The reality is most organisations are leaving the front door unlocked and the downstairs windows wide open because the basic IT hygiene isn't there. Essentially knowing what you have, keeping up to date, and being able to respond to threats quickly when they do emerge and managing that state. So I think I agree, but I think it's that complexity. And I think there was a quote recently that I really liked, which was, we've gone past the point of being able to keep up with that change and that complexity now. Effectively, even as people, our ability to kind of understand, the rate of change in society, let alone as an enterprise, we're way past that point now. The stuff is changing so fast, we're just playing catch up in most cases. So just knowing what you have and knowing what's entering your organisation and managing that complexity, for me, is really going to be key for organisations to thrive and survive.
I think that's it. Just almost as a mindset, it's just being comfortable with change.
Yep.
That is the plan. If you can be comfortable with it and then build a plan around that, then you don't get stuck. You don't get left behind.
Constant is change.
Yeah.
What a great place to stop. Thank you very much, everyone. I mean, fantastic contributions. Really, really well done. Really well described, and some really interesting insights there, unexpectedly. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.